Welcome to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Hello everyone, it's Jesse Green here. Welcome back to SavvyDentist.com and to the Savvy Dentist podcast. It's wonderful to have your company today. And I'm joined today by Zac Herps, who is the managing partner at Hill House Legal Partners. One of the things I've been really keen to talk to Zac about is documentation. We all know as business owners that getting your documentation right is critical. And when you get it right, it gives you that terrific peace of mind knowing that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed. And we also know that when it's not documented properly, then you're at risk of having disputes and issues with whether it's team members or anything else, right? We just don't want to go there. So in today's podcast episode, Zac and I talk about the importance of having great advisors around you and how to know, what the advice you're getting, whether it's fit for purpose or not. We're going to talk about the key documents you want to have in your practice for operations and the benefits of each of those documents. We're going to be talking about different structures, the pros and cons of which kind of structures you need. We're going to be talking about intellectual property and privacy and all the things you need to know about that. Obviously, we'll talk about employment considerations, the types of documents, whether you're looking at facility agreements or just general employment conditions. And finally, we're going to talk about estate planning because, at the end of the day, all of us are going to pass on. I don't want to sound morbid, but what we want to do is to make sure that that process is as easy and as seamless as possible for our loved ones so that they're not dealing with any kind of drama that comes from poor planning on top of the drama that they're experiencing that comes from grief. So this is a really good podcast in terms of information that you're going to want to write notes down, checklists and so on and so forth. And if you have a lawyer, then please make sure you've got all these documents in place. If you don't have a lawyer, then maybe give Zac a call and talk to him about getting this in place too. So without any further ado, here's Zac Herps from Hill House Legal Partners. Hey, Zac. Thanks so much for taking the time to come and hang with us here on the Savvy Dentist podcast. How's things up in Brisbane, mate?
Thanks, Jesse, for having me. Look, State of Origin concluded last night. I happen to be a New South Welshman in foreign territory, so I'm pretty pleased with myself right now. But some of my colleagues, not so much.
Yeah, I did forget to mention we have editing power of this podcast, Zac. So I'm a Queenslander living in New South Wales. So I'm on the other end of that spectrum, living in enemy territory and getting flogged left, right, and centre. I've received numerous emails today, and I'm duly ignoring them. But anyway, mate, we are going to talk a lot about getting legal structures right and so on and so forth. And in your capacity as a lawyer and as one of the directors at Hill House Legal Partners, I wanted to probably kick off the conversation, I guess, from the point of view around having the right team around you. Now, the context of this, I guess, is my thinking is getting your legals right is such an important thing because when it goes wrong, it's quite hard to unwind, it's expensive to unwind, and so on and so forth. So I guess I wanted to ask you about the importance of getting the right advice, maybe even second opinions if you need to. How do you know if it's good advice? How do you differentiate between good advice and not good advice? And is it possible for a layman?
That's not a straightforward, super easy thing because if you go and pay, if I go to the dentist, I hope that person is an expert and is giving me the exact treatment I require and I sort of rely and trust them to do so. As a lawyer, we certainly see unfortunately, some that aren't, that, they might be totally capable lawyers or general commercial lawyers, but medical has its own nuances, own requirements and own, niched areas. And sometimes some, expert providers in inverted commas will, oh yeah, sure, how difficult can this be compared to a shareholders arrangement for any other company or any other structure? But personal services income rules, service agreements and other, unique things, you need to be across those as well. For anybody, anyone selling or practicing medicine would say, they're an expert, rely on us, rely on our opinion, seek it out. Don't perform home dentistry. That's not going to take you very far. We adopt the same view. We've set up thousands of practices. We've helped thousands of, in this case, dentists, doctors, specialists, etc. We've done many setups, many growth trajectories, many sales. We know what acquirers are looking for. We know what works. We know what doesn't. We know what leads people to have disputes. So get a good team around you. especially if you're doing it for the first time, establishing or setting up, and it's all a bit foreign, go and speak to some people that have done it many, many times before to guide you through it. You don't have to do it by yourself.
Zac, just on that, every business has a certain set of documentation, a certain set of agreements, and as you quite rightly pointed out, medicine and dentistry will have their own nuances around that. In terms of getting your right legal structures in place, is there a suite of agreements, or is there a certain variety of documentation that most practices would need? I know that every practice is slightly different, but just looking at the 80-20 rule, is there a suite of documents that we'd need?
Yeah, look, you're right in that group size, complexity, and other things can dictate what's essential or what's necessary to govern a group well. But generally, there are some common features or common suites of docs that a lot of practices that are set up in a sort of standard or usual format will have. And within those docs as well, you want to see some common features too. So I might speak to that for a minute.
Yeah.
Obviously setting up the structure correctly, getting proper tax and accounting advice. Nobody wants to pay more tax or get penalties or find themselves in problems. You want to probably try and keep it as tax effective as you can, but also as simple as you can. Some advisors, you can overcomplicate. It makes compliance and other things more expensive, more fees in it too, if you take a cynical view. But people coming in or coming out of a group, if something's overly complex and extremely difficult, it makes that ease of entry and exit a lot harder. You also probably want to consider short, medium, and long-term sort of vision and goals. What's right for you, the Savo, as an ABN sole trader, as just an example. If you see yourself with 4 locations, 20 people, and a corporate style exit in 30 years' time, you might not want to set up, as option A, when option B is going to what you need for that future growth to let people come in to own a share, to be incentivized to perform, and to ultimately be able to help you sell it. Mm-hmm. So thinking about that and where you find yourself in the future is important, because changing it is doable, but duty and a whole bunch of other tax complications or considerations can enter. The government does like to stick its hand out. If you've made an error on your choice 10 years ago, they're like, we're more than comfortable with you fixing it up, but we want to charge you, some fees to make that happen. Mm-hmm. As back on the documentation point, it's very common for group practices to either have a unit holders, shareholders, or partnership agreement that would cover the absolute lion's share of what we see in medical practices across the board. Service agreements for your associates or your other people that might not necessarily own shares in the business or a slab of it, but are operating under those arrangements. Employment agreements, you'll often have other staff that might not be medical professional staff. They might be reception staff, billing, admin, support, etc. Leases and or agreements for lease if you're renting a premises, or even if you own it yourself, you still need an arm's length lease between yourself. Trust deeds, and incorporating companies and other bits and pieces. But they're probably the most common sort of suite of docs that I think you need to function as a general practice unless it is just literally yourself.
With that suite of docs, and that's a really comprehensive list, so thank you for doing that. So ladies and gents, make some notes there, document that down. What I wanted to ask you is, you touched on something I think that's really important, and that was getting it right at the beginning because of the expense, in not just monetary, but time, hassle, whatnot, in terms of trying to unwind things. What is the most common mistake that people make when it comes to these documents? Is it not having the right ones in place, or is it the documents themselves not being fit for purpose? What are the common pitfalls that you see?
Probably see a few themes arise frequently. They are different, but a major one would be thinking small early. And that's, I run a business too, I get it. So if people are bootstrapping and just getting going, they go, it's just me, I've got one chair, I don't want to invest the time and money to significant slabs of advice from accountants, tax guys, financial planners, or lawyers. They might have someone join. It's a friend of theirs, let's say, as a generic example, from university. It's a handshake agreement. We're best mates. It'll be fine. And then it's fine until it's not fine.
Yes.
And then what governs their relationship. Someone wants to leave, who owns patients, who owns the location, who owns the brand, who owns this. That's where we see, unfortunately, in our litigation practice, some disputes start to arise, and disputes are very stressful and bloody expensive. So, cheap always ends up expensive in the long run, and that'd be a pitfall. It's kind of the lackadaisical, she'll be right style approach. So they get an associate in and go, oh, they're great. We're really keen to have them. Let's not waive an agreement under their nose. And then are we exposed to payroll or not? Are we exposed to super or not? If they want to go again, they go, I'm taking my 300 book with me. No, you're not. It was generated by the practice, and again, these issues arise. So I think that's a definite sort of common pitfall. Sometimes, not fit for purpose. Business law changes and business needs change. So if it's you and your spouse as a practice manager and owner, and it's just the two of you, the reality is that very light on or no documentation. You're not going to argue with yourself about what rent you're paying or how much money you distribute or disperse or pay your spouse as a practice manager or as an assistant or whatever it may be. But very rapidly, you can't adopt the same approach to arm's length, complete strangers that have no loyalty or anything, affiliation with you. They need to position descriptions, roles, responsibilities. What are they doing? What are they getting paid? So the relationship's different, and assuming sort of everyone's the inverted commas good bloke, good person, that can be a pitfall.
You've spoken in some of those documents as well about trust deeds and incorporation documents and so on and so forth. It makes me wonder about structures. And obviously, you've already touched on the fact that, depending on where you are and what you're trying to achieve, different structures might suit different needs and serve different purposes. I wondered, structures I always find can be a bit confusing. Is it possible just to provide just a quick overview of the broad types of structures and maybe a couple of pros and cons of each of them? So anyone listening to this can probably go to their accountant, lawyer, financial planner, whomever, and have a more educated conversation from the outset.
Yeah, sure. Look, structure's very much driven. It's not to follow off the question, mind you, but we're the end of chain that helps implement it. It's normally tax driven, maybe asset protection and tax driven, and it's also driven by the current and future, as I mentioned earlier, sort of goals and where you see yourself. So the structure and the documentation suite you might need if you're a solo practitioner will be different than if you're a group practice that needs rules governing decision making as a group of 3, 4, 20. And then it might be different again if you're buying into a practice that's already established and already has a certain structure, and they're either prepared to vary it or not prepared to vary it, and it's kind of a take it or leave it. So the first sort of threshold question there is it a solo? What type of practice is it? Is it a solo practice, a group one, or an entry into an existing one? And then what you may need for each one of those can vary a little bit from there. Yep. Again, sort of if it's just yourself, a shareholders agreement on decision making simply becomes moot and irrelevant. You're not going to hold meetings and decide whether you've got a quorum and decide whether you've got the 70% threshold for a major decision or not and things like that. You're just going to do it.
Sure.
But if you're in business partners, then that decision making and that document becomes very important. Do we need to have a meeting to buy a box of pens, or do we need to have a meeting if we're going to buy $100,000 piece of equipment, or is the threshold even bigger than that? It's hiring, firing, entering into $1 million leases or transactions only, and otherwise an MD or a manager takes care of the commercial day-to-day. But it's making sure everyone's aligned and understands whatever that is. You can agree to anything, but it's making sure there's alignment on it, not, I thought we'd have meetings about all this stuff, and someone else goes, no, I don't want to be bogged down in this. I want to practice. I've got other things to do. So, but the type of practice it is and how many people are in it will definitely govern to some degree of the documents and how you share profits. What if someone wants to exit? Do you need what trading entity is appropriate? What service entity is appropriate, and things like that.
One of the things that I know, I've had one or two people reach out to me recently about, people who haven't yet started their practice, admittedly, is where does the liability of the director begin and end? And again, I know that's probably a really big question and it might take us down a rabbit hole, but just briefly, I guess what I'm trying to make sure of is that people take those responsibilities seriously and they know broadly what they're up for.
directors' duties and responsibilities is actually a bit of a scary topic. You're one, I'm one. Of our own businesses. I sit on a board as well, and we get what is it? And there's significant, extensive courses just on director duties. Like, RMIT does one, this group does one, this one does a crash course in 6 weeks. They're pretty onerous and pretty overarching. Me speaking to every section of the Corps Act would fall way beyond the scope of this, but there's some general ones about fiduciary duty, financial, monetary, et cetera, et cetera. A global overarching one would be morally and ethically. That compass, if it's straight and narrow, it'll be very difficult to fall foul of some of those obligations. It's people that want to test those boundaries and those lines. But certainly if anybody was interested or wants to know, because I've been asked this before from the board work, I could send an email to some links of where those duties broadly sit. We've got a concise sort of multi-page fact sheet and some resources where you can go and start to look into it for yourself. But it is, when I first read it, I was like, even I was, as a partner of a law firm, I was like, I'm responsible for a fair bit of stuff here. You've got to take this stuff pretty seriously. So.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess the reason I'm asking this, just to kind of provide some context for that question, is do you think most people are aware of those duties?
I think most people know there's some overarching obligation, and you can't just be a director and own, in inverted commas, a company and just do as you please. But if you said, list them off, where are they sourced from? Where's the power come from? Very few lawyers, accountants included. I think there's as I said, I think most people let their moral compass guide them more than the strict rules dictated out. And unfortunately, there's someone in trouble every day with ASIC and up in the courts for having not done the right thing. But there's also tens and tens of thousands of people that do the right thing and steer clear of that nasty stuff. But getting, at least being aware of them would be a great start, I think. So people should look into that. And if you Google Directors' Duties Corporations Act, there'll be a pile of things will pop up for you pretty swiftly.
I guess one of the interesting things about health practice compared to perhaps other businesses as well is the data that we collect. And obviously it's very personal in nature. It's got people's medical histories. We store, lots and lots of stuff that, people wouldn't want disclosed. I wanted to ask you a little bit about privacy regulations.
Yep.
And I guess maybe not a close cousin, but in my mind, close cousin is around, data protection. I know you're not an IT guy, but, just in terms of what the obligations are around cybersecurity, because we've seen Optus hacked, we've seen Medibank hacked, and one of the things that struck me around those two hacks is I think it was Medibank, or one of those companies was being fined for having not protected the data well enough. But what's really interesting to me is those companies were both victims of crimes, and on one hand, it's really sad that data is gone, of course, but punishing the company for being the victim of a theft also seemed a bit jarring to me, and I don't quite know how to reconcile that. So what's the go with data protection?
I think that penalty is being used as a stick to encourage people to hit best privacy principle standards. Otherwise there's no ramification for the business itself, and says it wasn't me that hacked myself, it was a baddie.
Yeah.
Everyone just goes, there's no consequence to me, so I can be pretty lackadaisical about this requirement. You are right. It's onerous. It's a bit like the directors thing. If you actually dug into how responsible you are, some people might get a bit nervous, and it's ever growing. So law is, and I just speak about it because I'm in it and I'm a bit more familiar with it, but is pretty onerous. Our data and client information and money and all sorts of things is that we have to do a lot of investigating, a lot of control. We run trust accounts and hold other people's money on their behalf. The anti-money laundering phase 2 is coming in towards the end of this year, and it's incredibly onerous of IDing where source funds came from, IDing how they got to you, IDing the people that are sending them to you is getting tougher and tougher, and time and risk in not getting that right. Medico data is even more sacrosanct. It's not allowed to go offshore. It's not allowed to leave Australia. It has to have, I think it's a minimum of something like 3 redundancies. Like if Azure or Brisbane goes down, it needs to move somewhere, then it needs to move somewhere else, then it needs to move somewhere else. I know of some hospitals, which I won't name, but they're very concerned at the moment because doctors have been permitted for a long time to access emails and patient data, for example, from their laptops and on weekends on their phones, but through a gateway into the hospital's IT security system.
Right.
And a doctor leaves their phone in the back of an Uber, massive problem. So they're really struggle with how do we let patient care happen at random time, weekends, and all the necessary things that come, with emergency treatment and all that sort of stuff in a way where it's controlled and can't be hacked and can't be moved, which is a very difficult thing because you're only as good as the person's use or that device. You can have $1 billion security system at Azure and Mr. Gates or Mr. Bezos trying to keep them out, but they're not on my laptop in my house with my kids playing around on it or something. It's becoming, they're sheeting home responsibility to the people holding it. I think having medico expert IT people, because if you go to the wrong one, they will go, it's cheaper for us to host in the Philippines, bang, it's moved offshore. You are committing an offence with each one of those patient forms and each one of those patient files, even though it's not you doing it, it's your IT provider doing it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's, you want someone that understands those things, understands them well, and, is probably hosting in serious infrastructure to protect it to the level that you'd expect, a Medibank or a hospital. So we adopt a view here at Hill House that, again, Azure or, a Microsoft, yes, they're a much bigger target, but they're putting literally billions of dollars per annum just into protecting that stuff. Otherwise, their product is a massive failing, and the publicity fallout for them from hacks is terrible. They will do a better job than I would, even though we'd be much less of a target with our own little server. It'd be more vulnerable. So, but yeah, really important.
And what about other forms of intellectual property? How to protect it? Things like your processes, your systems, your knowledge bank, and so on that lives within the practice. How do you protect that? Because that becomes a business asset, and when you want to sell your practice, that has real commercial value. What are the agreements? Is that part of the employment or the facility agreements that you have in place about that intellectual property belongs to the practice? Is that where that lives?
Yeah, IP and confidential information, they sort of are intertwined for patient records and data on one side, and then systems of work, anything developed by you or them whilst working for you remains the property of the practice. The reality is, though, Jesse, very hard to enforce.
Yeah,
if someone just downloads a big patient list and starts ringing people,
what do you do?
Relatively straightforward, although still stressful and expensive to go and potentially seek an injunction to stop such behaviour. Somebody who's starting their own practice and copying the way you do something internally, very hard to get evidence, video recording that they do the same procedure in the same fashion and have copied something or nicked something. That stuff is hard. Branding and IP and external marks, very important though. So having your own domain, your own website, your own T's and C's, your own trademark and branding. If you're marketing on, let's say, social media or in geographic location and you've got a proper brand presence, the last thing you want is someone setting up 2 meters down the road, same colour, same name, passing off as you and causing confusion.
Yeah.
So, but if you haven't registered anything and haven't put any protections in place, IP Australia adopted, it's a free market. You had an opportunity to go and do it if you were first to market. Then you have to have a fight about whether you were first to market, how much the brand's known, and that's expensive. Whereas if you go and register and maintain a trademark and things like that, it's much easier to block other people passing off as yourself. So we strongly... 30 years ago where maybe law or medicine was a lot more word of mouth and things like that, not as important. But now where people are building up brands of Dr. So-and-so or Clinic X in X suburb, where that really matters, I think registering those things and having control over them twofold for competition and also for people leaving, it's become more commonplace, probably for some of your listeners, Jesse, where the practice, it is the marketing machine, and it then divvies up patients to, books to other associate dentists, and it will retain that control. But if it's not even an entity itself, has no trademark, has no IP, has no nothing, how is it controlling these things? So that it's very easy for the dentist to say, no, that's mine, and I'm taking it with me. So Yeah.
Speaking of dentists and that sort of stuff, and I don't know if this is a legal question or a business question, but I'll run it up the flagpole nonetheless. If you have a restraint of trade provision in your contracts,
Yep.
and young Dr. Smith has been working away at your practice under whatever arrangement may be, but they've been building this Google My Business profile outside of that, knowing that they're going to leave and go down the road, and though they're not going to take the client list, they've kind of built a market presence using your patient base, using those resources, and so on. Is that just kind of tough luck, or is that just kind of how does that work? Is that a legal thing or is it a business thing? I'm not sure where the line
Probably
falls on that.
a bit of both. You might be able to assert something like it's breaching the component that says you can't operate any like or competing business while you work here. But it'd be tough. At a business level, it's painfully obvious, but the best way to undo or thwart that sort of activity is probably multifold. One, identify it early and say no. And then, because otherwise, if the person just continues with it, they're probably not a long-term player and the right fit. And do you want to invest training and time and resources and effort in building up their career and their book when you know that's what they're like? But I've heard that high, slow, fire, fast. But none of us seem to do it because it's a pretty challenging thing to do. But it might be that, if you think their self-interest is at that level, or you've got them so wedded to the business that the patient won't exit, because restraints in medicine are incredibly hard to enforce.
Yeah.
Patients are free to seek medical care from whomever, from wherever they see fit. And even if you say, no, you've got a restraint and you can't do this, and the dentist, let's say in this case, says, understood, but then 50 patients go, they've been treating me for 10 years, I love them, that's where me and my kids are going now, that's the end of it.
Yeah.
I think that practice can't force that dentist to not see them, and at a dental level, maybe not as emergency, but if you spin it around to, say it's a cardiologist and the person's had a heart attack and they've had surgery and they've been seeing this cardiologist for 20 years, it could be dangerous to force them to see someone else, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Medically. So it isn't going to take you the best way to deal with these things, a legal solution isn't a great solution. It's a commercial one and a practical one. Beat them in the market. I do know of some practices that for cleans and things like that, don't let any particular patient get wedded to any particular hygienist or dentist. That it's like a different person comes in and goes, I'm seeing the kids today, and then next 6 months it's so-and-so isn't here, so so-and-so will drop in and just do that check.
Yeah.
And you're wedded to the business and the building and the practice rather than any particular person. So if people come and go, the continuity of care remains, and
that's the practice.
It all exits.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Okay. No, that's really helpful. And while we're talking about team and so on, I guess one of the questions that is on a lot of people's lips is, what are some of the important considerations when it comes to employment style documents?
Look,
or facility agreements, for example, but anything where you're engaging others.
Look, SFAs and employment docs have different drivers, I suppose, or I don't know, but priorities might be the word I'm looking for. So employment agreements, you want the employer, for a start, the landscape is incredibly pro-employee. So for all us employers out there, it's a challenging sandpit to play in to begin with. Most of the rights and assistance in that world goes to the employee. So even if you have pretty thorough documents, pretty clear, good PDs, good expectations, and you follow what's in them, if someone isn't working out, it's still not the easiest thing in the universe to exit that person. If you have none of those things, Fair Work is much more likely than not to step in and assist that person. So you definitely need them. It's already tough, even if you do it well. So if you do it poorly, it's almost impossible to performance manage, exit someone, or to get someone to lift. So from that, but employment agreements tend to give very clear expectations, PDs, control.
Yep.
And that's one of the benefits. But then you pay super and you have to do all these other things, leave only, et cetera, to get those benefits as an employer. Whereas an SFA is going sort of the other way and is saying you aren't an employee. I don't maintain that level of control over you, but I then don't pay you certain things. I don't pay leave. I don't pay super. You account for that yourself. I don't do this. I don't do that. What it is it's actually the dentist paying a fee for services being provided by the practice. The practice doesn't own or control them. The issue with a lot of medical agreements is they've actually become a bit of a hybrid of both. So the practice wants to say, you've got to wear this uniform. You've got to work on these days for business efficacy, and we want to control you to some degree. But then for tax reasons, payroll reasons, and other things, no, you're running your own business. That comes back to your point as well with Google reviews and stuff. If they're running an SFA and you're holding out to the tax department, for example, or to payroll, that they are an independent contractor doing their own thing and come and visit Dr. Zac at his own website, for you to then say, you can't do this and you can't do that and you can't leave and you're restrained, and because you're asserting all these controls over them like they're a staff member. So it's a conversation we have to have with all practice owners, and we have to work out, what's your risk profile? What are you trying to achieve? How tight do you want to go on this? Noting the tighter you go, then there's potential, payroll tax implications is one example. But the less control you've got, the less you can say, you must be here Tuesday to Saturday, you must do this, you must do that. So it's which one are you wanting to run, and what are the economic, tax, and other consequences of running one or the other? Yeah, and it's hard because most people want both. They want the control and to restrain and to control the information, control the patients, retain everything, tell you when you have to work, tell you how you have to work, teach you, and then want to say, but in these other circumstances when it suits me, you're none of those things. You're Joe Block's plumber turning up to work to do a job for me when I need you, and otherwise you're not. So it's not an easy thing to walk, and there's benefits and cons to both. Yeah. I also have some other practices, including a couple of big ones. They bite the bullet and say, they're all employees, we'll eat the tax, we'll eat whatever, it's my show, I run it how I want, and that's the cost of doing business, and they provision for it, and they do it. Yeah,
build it into their fee structures and so on and so forth. What about employment agreements for general team? Is there anything in particular that, I'm moving away from the clinical team for a second, your DAs, your receptionists, who would fall under that traditional employee arrangement. Is there anything in that kind of documentation that you think is really necessary or commonly overlooked, or pitfalls?
Look, again, I think role responsibility and stuff is a big one. If people are clear on what's expected of them and what they're being paid for, your potential for dispute or malalignment and all that and underperformance reduces. Obviously, there's various, just subject to whether they're nursing or clinical or admin, awards and rewards shift and levels shift subject to their experience and age and all sorts of stuff. So being across that is very important. Almost everybody's probably seen in the news at some point a 7-Eleven or a so-and-so massively underpaying people accidentally for a long time on the wrong award or the wrong this or the wrong that. Some would argue some of these people, it's a blatant breach deliberately so. Others, there's been, it appears, sort of genuine mistakes where payroll's established in, let's say 2008, award shift, night, day, weekend, not weekend shift, and they haven't accounted for all of this as it's changed, and $1.12 an hour. But if you've got 50 people and it goes for 5 years, it's a big penalty and a big bill when it gets discovered, and it gets enough to sink the Columbarises of this world many times over. And he was, that was $7 million, I think it was in the end. So employment law moves a lot. It set and forget where you go, well, we got our agreements done in 1990. They're ridgy-dig. You need to have them reviewed. You need to have them checked out. You need to have them updated.
We hear about the 7-Eleven situations that you articulated, but the great Australian sickie to me is wage theft as well, or bludgeoning on the job, wage theft, fudging the timesheets, wage theft. So I wanted to talk a bit about best practice around making sure that, of course, as employers, we want to always do the right thing. That's we always have to, take the high moral road on that. But I want to just ask about fraud prevention, or any of those sorts of things that might be related to that as well.
As a lawyer and a legal style solution, you have a few, tools in your toolkit, but will only take you so far. So obviously policies, and so it can range from devices. How can you use them? When can you use them? Why? As an example, it can get embarrassing because you start to be like, we're treating people like children rather than like staff. There are many governmental or large institutions, piles of websites are locked down. You can't look at Instagram at work. You can't look at Facebook. You can't do that. You can't get onto Spotify and listen to music. They're like, you're at work where we've got 100,000 of you. We're governing your internet use. To look at those productivity things. Work from home policies, what's expected. A massive part of this, though, is always accountability and measurability. So that I'm very, as a lawyer who, at its ultimate baseline, we sell time for a living.
Yes.
We have very complex practice management software systems that account for time, how it goes. So I'm spoiled in that if someone's working flexibly, if someone's working from home, if someone's working early, someone's working late, the sheet pretty rapidly
shows it
indicates if that is effective and productive or whether it's inefficient. And what's actually happening is 4 hours of home duties and chores are being attended to, and that's fine, but the flex time's never being made up at night time or otherwise. It's just lost. In other things, that's a lot tougher. In working from home, if you're fixing people's teeth all day, that's probably not very productive, I suspect. Getting a hold of someone who takes the great Aussie sickie repeatedly, runs out of levers in negative levers in whatever, that's probably the commencement of a very gentle discussion moving towards a performance management discussion if it warrants it over time. You need a leave policy for a start. If you've just got nothing, I'm playing in a sandpit, I don't know what the framework is. There's excuse after excuse can come, and it can take you months or years to get rid of somebody like this if that's where it ultimately needs to go.
Yeah.
Whereas if this is what it's for, this is blah. An approach may well be, firstly, a sit down. How is your health? What's going on? What can we do to support that? What can we do to do this? You're constantly unwell or taking time off. That can indicate, that little first start of a nudge, like twofold. We're here to help you, and if you need help, tell us. But if you don't, we expect it to improve. If you don't need, mental health support, physical health support, what are you doing to yourself time-wise, late nights? Since, why do you need 30 days a year off? I'm just making up an example if you're a fit, healthy, relatively young person. So how do we get it? But that productivity in Australian professional services is down everywhere, and institutions large and small are grappling with it. COVID changed the universe. We're doing this in a format that we might not have done it 7 years ago, as an example. Work from home, flex, everything became just bog standard norm. At first, it was all this is great. People are working really hard, but people were very fearful of the future and of their jobs when this first arrived, and the world was shut down. So you couldn't go anywhere, see anyone, or do anything. So you're working and you're fearful for your job. So you're working pretty hard. So the productivity reports came out. Everyone's working hard. It's great. Then schools opened, sports started, cafes opened, other logistic requirements, etc. And some of the people I know, very large huge international engineering firm did a big report of it. It's got 70,000 people, and productivity's nosedived since. While people take up that opportunity to attend to life maintenance and logistics and admin and don't work the extra few hours on the back end of it or before it, now that's required. So there's, I know is a very polarizing figure, but Mr. Musk has decided everyone's coming to work or they can't work there. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the answer, but it's one company said, we've tried this and it's not working for me, so it's no longer available.
Yeah.
I work from home.
Hey, look, love him or hate him, he you know where you stand with him, and I think my take on that is if you don't like it, leave, Yeah.
I mean, I know, look, it's a thing that I know lots of accounting and legal firms have been grappling with, what do we, because we can work from a phone and a computer anywhere, airport, airplane, hotel, home, office. If you save that travel time, yes, some people can get a few things done. It's a great benefit. So long as productivity doesn't wane, fantastic. But it's what if it does? And then how do you do something about it? So some work from home policies have gotten pretty complicated. For example, a legal one that you could implement is you can work from home. Let's say, I'm just making up a number, 1 day a week,
yep,
or 2 days a week. But the requirement is you must be surpassing time targets and you must be ahead of your financial budget. And if you're neither of those things, that right to do those things is taken away until such time as you are, as a stick carrot measurer.
I think it's really interesting, that whole productivity thing. Is, you're quite right. It's a tricky one, and I think you're right. COVID did change everything. We had a situation some years ago, it was a lot of years ago now, in our dental practice. We had a team member who had a weekend job at a bar, and she'd be working whatever nights of the weekend, pulling beers, doing all that sort of stuff, and we wore the brunt of the sick leave on the Monday. It was like every other Monday she was crook, because she'd been working long shifts, getting casual wages out of the pub, and we didn't have a policy at that time saying you can't have another job or you can't do this. And I remember at the time feeling a bit miffed that we were the ones kind of paying the sick leave on that.
Yeah, look, it's a hard thing. It probably comes to, again, that the staff that you invest in and retain, it's almost everything, isn't it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Very easy to sit here on a Zoom call saying it. Very, very
hard to deal with it. Yeah.
Every single person pulling the same, carriage in the same direction, as hard as each other, and for the same period of time. There's no two ways about it. So
yeah, 100%. All right, mate. Let's just shift gears for a second. What about estate planning, wills, getting that documentation in place up front and early? And again, I'm curious to ask, obviously one of the big mistakes is not having a will and having provisions in place in the first instance. But beyond that, what are the common bugbears or missteps or challenges that you see coming up in this area?
The toughest challenge here, Jesse, is getting people to actually action something. As a law firm and as an owner, it's a tough sell. You've got to spend money to think about not being around. You're not going to be around, and it's not going to directly impact you. It is going to have a massive impact on those closest to you. So when people are busy, say you've got young children, you're running your business, you're just keeping your nose above water with all your logistical work and other obligations as it is, and then you say you've got to carve out headspace and time and cost to address this issue. If something happens to you, and I don't even want to know about it, very common, hard, especially if someone is fit, young and healthy. If there's a health event, a poor diagnosis, poor prognosis, or someone in the family's just passed away and it's all front of mind, you've got a more captive audience. But if you're mid-30s or 40 years old, clean bill of health, saying, hey, this should be right at the top of your priority list, very difficult. So, but then, of course, things happen, and we've had a few families, unfortunately, that adopted that view. I've got a case study, sort of an example that I've used many times, but it's poor mining and very well insured, massive insurance policies. Kids 12, 10, 7, something like that, killed on site. No will. Public trustee has a function to perform in those circumstances. It got the insurance payout, which was many millions of dollars, but then it has to work out in cascading order between wife, children, and others who should get what proportions of it and why, when no one specified anything. And it took 18 months to work that out. And then, so there's no money for mum and kids. Kids are school fees to pay, bills to pay. That's what this insurance is for. She's borrowing money off her elderly parents to fund her family's existence while this got worked out. And then once it was worked out, they decided that, and I'm not having a job at the PT, was to be put in a trust on account for each kid, 1/3 each with. And so then it's locked up until they're of age, and the youngest one was 7, so you can't have it for 11 years. Very poor outcome. This guy was paying something like 25 grand a year in various different TPD, trauma, and blah, blah, blah insurances, and a will for a couple of grand would have specified all this, would have dealt with it. It would have been able to get probate and get access to the funds within a couple of weeks or months, couple of months, tops. Instead, and other, his share portfolio and all these sorts of things, cash at bank, because when someone passes it, the bank freezes the accounts, freezes this. It's just a really awful outcome, incredibly stressful, and they're dealing with the grief. Dad's gone, husband's gone, and that on top of it. Almost everybody now between some form of property, share, some super, insurance inside. Every retail super fund has you insured for something, every health department, et cetera, you're not passing away on the pension with 10 grand worth of stuff anymore. That generation is gone. The average middle class person is relatively wealthy, and it needs to deal with these things for tax reasons and for efficacy if something happens to them. So having those docs in place, you don't want your legacy to be, I paid for insurance and worked so hard and did all these things to provide for education and things in the future, but what I actually left was an economic mess because this last little piece wasn't sorted out. Very important.
I've got a dear friend actually, and he's been going through some tough stuff. Parent died, et cetera, and what's become apparent is even things like trust deeds are hard to find, all those sorts of documents that you would normally be part of some sort of file that you have in case of passing. If we don't want to leave a mess to our loved ones to clean up, what sort of documents would you consider having in some sort of file structure somewhere? They obviously need a will. What else do they need to be able to access and know about?
Major things are bank account records and passwords, because sometimes people, even if you've been married forever, but when you were 14, you had your own bank account and you've never closed it and you've kept money in there to buy presents and other bits and pieces, share portfolio access, login codes, definitely company documents, insurance policies. So we have an insurance policy here. If I step out the Savo and get hit by a bus on Adelaide Street, we have a buy-sell arrangement and an insurance policy to fund that for the shares in Hill House, so that my wife doesn't have to negotiate or deal with other business partners here. There's a mechanism that just takes care of all of that. But it's all well and good for me to know that and be able to tell you this right now on a Zoom. She would know, where is it? How do you do it? Where do the share transfer forms come from? How does the money go to it? Which bank account does it go to? All this sort of stuff. We have developed out a thing, we've called it an executive's handbook, but it's got two parts to it. One is for people administering an estate, and the second is to give to clients who have just finished wills, EPOAs, and advanced health directives and stuff. Here's a list of major items that you should have in a file in one place, that your executor of your will, be it your spouse or a friend or a professional, if you've got lawyers and accountants to do it for you, they know where it is, they know what's in it. Perfect would be electronically held and also physically. And it lists off, it's literally a checklist with paragraph line spacing next to it, so you can go, I'll put this here. This is the login code for my Bitcoin ledger.
Yeah. Bitcoin wallets would be a huge one.
So all the way down to that stuff. But company docs, if you own a company and you own a practice together, if you die, what happens to your shares in it? What happens to your directorship? How do they sign things that ASIC and do things to remove you because obviously you're no longer alive? What happens with the decision making? Do they have to go to the remaining spouse and say, we want to buy a new laser? Are we allowed to or not? You know what I mean? I want to deal with any of this stuff. So, and people searching for things, putting notices in the newspaper and trying to track things down just slows everything down. It costs time and money. So if you compile it all in one safe place, your estate would be far quicker to administer, so then people will get access to funds and other things they need and not be going through the stress of that. So it's a very good idea.
Yeah, perfect. Mate, thank you. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And for anyone listening, I'd really encourage you to think about getting your documentation right. I think one of the big lessons I've learned over the years is having good documentation in place just gives you peace of mind. It gives you surety that if things go north, south, east or west, that you're going to be okay. And so I'd really encourage you, if you haven't got those documents in place, whether it's your employment agreements or your directors of your companies and trusts and everything else, right, or your estate plan or whatever, have a chat to Zac. Or if you have your own lawyer, that's fine too. But reach out to Zac at Hill House Legal Partners and get this done, because it's too important. And it was only a couple of years ago now, or maybe 18 months ago, that we redid our wills. And again, things had changed a lot since we'd previously done wills, and the things that we needed to update were substantial. So please don't let that go. Just be on top of it, be proactive, as Zac has said. So, mate, if people want to find out where Hill House Legal Partners is, what's the best way to contact you, mate? Is it through email?
Yeah, probably. I mean, certainly if anyone on any of these topics, I can direct you to the right team member. So my email is just Zac, Z-A-C, at hillhouse, HILLHAUSE.com.au. Our website is also just hillhouse.com.au if you're searching for a practice area, searching for a person, or looking for some details on myself. We'd love to give you a hand.
Thanks, mate. Hey, bud, thanks again for your time, mate. You're a good man, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you soon. And I always appreciate your advice, mate. What I love about what you do is you take something complex, you make it digestible, simple, and easy to understand for a layperson, but get the outcomes that are needed. So thank you for all the work you do, mate. You're a good man.
My pleasure, mate. Thanks very much for having us. And as we mentioned at the beginning, if I'm lucky enough to get onto another one, I think we should probably dig into a bit of property.
Yeah.
Leasing, buying, building super funds, all that sort of stuff. That tends to be another hot button topic. I'm a bit payroll taxed out, so let's do some property stuff. So,
yeah, let's do something that doesn't sound quite so negative.
Right.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, mate. Well, let's do that. I think that'll be a really valuable topic. So let's make some plans for that. And ladies and gents, if that is a valuable topic to you, please hit me up on the socials. Let me know. And if there's other things that you think you'd like to hear Zac talk about, again, let us know. We can get that going. Looking forward to catching up with you soon, and take good care.
Thanks again. Cheers, guys.
Thanks, mate.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast. For more episodes, go to drjessiegreen.com/savvydentist. And to discover how to build a high-performance dental practice, visit drjessiegreen.com and download the free report.